It is my pleasure to introduce to some, and others already know, Michelle Bryant, who is a community activist, a political strategist, a lover of history, also educated in history, mother, grandmother, lover of blues and jazz festivals, and a major voice when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. She walks what she talks, and she talks what she walks. I am forced to put in here that she is my sorority sister, representing Delta Sigma Theta, a service oriented organization. Her bio is longer than what we have time to share, so let me just give you some of the highlights. She is a former chief of staff with the Wisconsin State Legislature, a former budget and policy director, a staff member for the state's powerful Joint Finance Committee, and she was the former executive director of the African World Festival. Currently, she has a talk show on WNOV 860 The Voice, and this comes on Monday through Thursday from 7 to 9 a.m. And most of you who are connected with the league already know that I'm an avid listener. Now, WNOV is a Black owned radio station. It truly keeps the community, not only the Black community, but all communities up to date on issues that involve local happenings, things in the county, state, national, and international. So it helps us that she likes to travel. She's been to Africa and told us about it and shared videos. She is not afraid to confront controversial issues. And in addition to being a voice, pun intended, she is a listener. She has an open door policy for those seeking public office. However, some are afraid to appear. And as one of her former coworkers is known for this statement, I'm going to say, "You gonna learn today." Michelle?
Thank you so much, Sora. I appreciate it, and thank you so much to the League of Women Voters for inviting me. This is a much appreciated opportunity to engage with you and your members and supporters. So and thank you for the bio. Thank you for the bio reading. I was laughing when you said it's longer than we have time for. I was like, whoa, I'm getting that old. Um,
No, no, you've done that
when the
much.
bios start getting really long, that means you are getting old.
No, no,
But
no.
I certainly appreciate it. When thinking about a discussion in terms of today, and I appreciate it so much hearing kind of the updates and the meetings you all are planning and themes for upcoming meetings. One of the things that I noticed yesterday as we were celebrating Dr. King's birthday around the state yesterday, particularly here in Milwaukee, more than 13 events that happened here locally, there was a focus on the theme, where do we go from here? By many of these organizations. In the potential next 4 years, a lot of people are trying to think about, uh, taking a moment to look at where we are right now, what feels like gains and losses, and how do we determine a strategy, a pathway forward over the course of the next election cycle, if you're a political person, over the next portion of our lifetime, if you're just socially concerned and aware. But this question has permeated every room I've been in for the last couple of weeks, really since the election. Where do we go from here? And understanding, that I'm having a non-political, or I should say a non-partisan conversation, because politics is every day, whether we like it, whether it's comfortable, whether it's friendly, or adversarial. We deal with some element of politics every day. But partisanship is something that we won't deal with today, but we certainly have to figure out going forward, because it impacts the way we handle politics. It impacts the way we deal with policy. So Like a lot of folks, yesterday was an opportunity to reflect on social values, reflect on what's important. And I thought about myself, as many of you I'm sure do. Am I doing all that I can do? Am I a part of the problem, or am I a part of the solution? And what is it that I ultimately think that I would like to see? Years ago, I talk about how I first got into the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I started my career in social work. I am a Black history major, finished my degree from UW Milwaukee. So I'm always a person who's paid attention to causes and issues specifically related to the Black community, and how we as Black people move throughout the space that we call life. In working in child welfare, one of the things that stood out to me was the differences and lack of understanding about taking care of children that were African American, that were in custody of the state. So whether it was hair care products, it was skin care products, it was cultural conversations. There were many days that I was uncomfortable at work about the way our management team and our leadership of our organization were engaging children of color. Products that they were giving them for their skin was actually more detrimental than helpful. The products that they were using on their hair were not intended for Black hair. They were intended for hair of a very different texture and type, predominantly for white individuals. And I kept talking about who's making the purchases, who's making these decisions, and are you thinking about the end user, the person who has to benefit from these services and resources? With those complaints, the CEO of the organization said, well, let's figure it out. I said, I don't want to just be speaking from a basis of I'm Black and I know everything. I'd like to receive training. So I actually went to one of the very first organizations, Pope and Associates, out in Cincinnati, Ohio, who actually begun to do and lay the foundation for much of what we know as diversity, equity, and inclusion work today. Back in the day, it used to just be called diversity. That's it. As with everything else, we evolved over time, included equity, included inclusion, because one of the things that we realized when people talked about diversity, they frequently thought about race. Black, white, what's your racial demographic, who's in the room. Equity began to be a conversation, and I always like to use that of the child, um, or an individual that's in a wheelchair. I Elizabeth mentioned that I traveled to South Africa, or I was in Africa, a couple of different countries. And I remember being in a restaurant and saying I had to go to the restroom. And every restaurant, I think this was in South Africa, every restaurant was in the basement. I was like, what is up with the bathrooms in the basement? And so we're 14 steps down into these basements. And just out of curiosity, I said, where's the elevator? And none of them had elevators. And the first thing I did, being an American, I said, have these people never heard of ADA? And my friend who was on the trip with me, she started cracking up. She said, you do know that's Americans with Disabilities Act, right? It doesn't apply in other countries, Michelle. But I thought about the fact that if I'm dining with someone that is physically differently abled, how do they access a restaurant? So, do I choose this restaurant if I can't fully utilize the services? Equity was about that piece of saying we have people in some cases that will show up in the workplace that have a need for a wheelchair ramp, that have a need for, back in the day, it was a TTY machine when people had to answer the phone because they could not hear or hearing impaired, that may need braille, that may need accommodations of some sort. That was equity. The idea that we would level the playing field so that all could be engaged. And then inclusion, Barack Obama, when he first came into office, the very first piece of legislation he signed was the Lilly Ledbetter Law. Lilly Ledbetter, who actually, just for sake of conversation, was a conservative who used to work for the Firestone Company down in, I think it was Alabama. Years after Lilly Ledbetter, well, not years, but shortly after Lilly Ledbetter left her employment, retired from Firestone after years of service, Someone pulled her coattail. Hey, you know that your male counterpart had been making more than you for years. Lily actually had a better position, more experienced, different title, more responsibilities, but she was making less than her male counterpart. And so when we talked about fairness in the workplace, um, even bringing women into a lot of these roles that we had traditionally been overlooked for, people began to realize that it wasn't just enough to say diversity. We had to talk about equity. We had to talk about inclusion. We use the word in the legislature a lot around representation. I thought about representation when I looked at the incoming first 100 names that were announced by the Trump administration with this recent return to office. The One of the local media outlets did a great job of breaking everything down. So, and I think this helps with the picture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. President Trump identified 100 people to begin his cabinet appointees nominations. Of those 100 people, 16 are women, even though women account for 50% of this nation's population. But 16 are women. 84% of his appointments, nominations are male, even though men are a little bit less than 50% of the nation's population. In terms of racial demographics, 1% of his 100 nominees and appointees are Black. That actually totals out to one person. The individual he put over Secretary of HUD. Nearly 7% are Asian, nearly 5% are Hispanic Latino. Bottom line, Trump's overall pick for his cabinet is roughly about 87% white. But that's not reflective of the country and the nation that we live in. And so when people start talking about representation, we need to have organizations and companies and businesses and leadership that reflects the communities that they serve. That's where I land. That's my sweet spot. Those are the things that keep me up at night. Because whether we realize it or not, everybody is impacted by these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The region of the country that you hail from, it was interesting. Most of the people that have come in those first 100 appointments and nominations, more than 25% of them are from New York. Because that's what I know in terms of Trump. That's where I'm from. But when we only got one person from Wisconsin, Sean Duffy, who was included in that first 100 people. But you want to understand that there is a voice, there is someone who understands you, your conditions, that can be your face in a room that can help move a conversation. And I know the difference it makes to have representation in the room, because in the Wisconsin State Legislature, we did it every day. When I first went to work for the legislature, I worked for State Senator Lena Taylor, who is now Judge Taylor. One of the first things that I noticed in being in the building, there was not a picture, a portrait, a statue of any person of color in the entire state capitol. I was actually one of only 7 Black staffers in the entire building, in the entire state capitol. And if we counted the legislators on hand, who I think have never numbered more than 8 Black legislators at a time, it was a very interesting situation. And we would go into rooms and we would bring up Milwaukee. We would advocate for policies that not just helped African Americans, but residents of Milwaukee, both Milwaukee County, 4th Senate District, the city of Milwaukee, and then the suburban areas that were in the district. There was a level of disdain. There was a level of fear. And being able to humanize the people from those, because you're making decisions, policy decisions that will impact these people that you are afraid of, that you have no idea what these folks are really like, that you have preconceived notions by. And then I think one of my biggest frustrations was the idea that Milwaukee was always being framed as some place that was poor and begging and had our hand out, when the reality is that we are the biggest contributor to the state's revenues than any other municipality in the 72 counties. That we are, that this region, for we saw it in the shared revenue conversation about how much we get on our dollar. And I thought about California. If we thought we had it tough in Milwaukee in terms of shared revenue, to hear folks who are now saying there may need to be conditions placed on assistance to the folks that are in Southern California that are suffering from the fires, conditions. No conditions on Katrina, no conditions on, Florida, no conditions on Texas, but there may need to be conditions on California, because in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we differ with a lot of the policy things that California does. But to the shared revenue piece, for every dollar that California puts into the system, they were underwater in what they got back. So let's just say in Wisconsin, for every dollar that Milwaukee and our neighboring suburban communities put into the system, we get 40 cents back on our dollar. California was like negative of what they got back. Their dollar was worth $2.92 in terms of contribution. That's how much money they put in. So the idea that people would say that because of policy, because of lifestyle choices, because of the values that we differ on, we're going to perhaps provide conditional help, even though the state is pretty much living off you guys. It's the most frustrating thing I've ever seen. But the other piece of this, in addition to just having ideological differences, I'm going to have a hard moment right now. Dr. King talked about both our folks that were against our interest and folks that were our friends. And in doing so, you begin to kind of lay out how sometimes people that think that they are aligned with a particular community can inadvertently, unintentionally do harm as well. What do I mean by that? As we look at leadership, as we look at how we elevate people, how we move people forward, we have seen pockets of people that are allies that will try to define and decide for the Black community who our leaders should be. And we're not in the room. We're not really consulted. We're just kind of shown or told, or other people are quietly eliminated from the process because the individual may be more palatable, more acceptable, more friendly, more for our allies. It's not always what's in the best interest of this particular community. It's sometimes what's in the best interest of our allies. So if we are folks that champion or care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that we have to do, and this is everybody, Black folks, white folks, Hispanic, Latinos, Asians, everyone has to first look inward. We got to be willing to own our stuff. What is it that I'm still kind of uncomfortable with? We have seen wedge issues around economics and race and class. And, people have been made to believe that certain issues are more important than others. You would think that every child showing up for intramural sports right now is a transgender child.
Yeah.
The way this was presented. When if somebody said, "Can you give us the percentage?" It wouldn't even register at 1% of people that we're talking about. But we were able to have that play out in the most recent election in a way that I think caught a lot of people off guard. There has been a walking back of diversity, equity, inclusion. Some definitely would say since George Floyd. The country was captive because this wasn't the first time that something horrific like this had happened to an African American male in particular at the hands of law enforcement. Wasn't the first time. Wasn't the first time. But because of COVID, we were all in the house. We were all watching TV all day, over and over the loop. We were sick of MSNBC and seeing it. But it was in your face. You could not look away. And it caused some self-examination. And we saw policies come out from organizations that said, hey, we want to do better. We are going to look at our management structure. We're going to look at how we do supplier diversity contracts. We're going to look at how we engage the community. We're going to look at what we support. We want to do better. But there are many folks that will tell you that the backlash actually began with the election of Barack Obama.
Oh, yeah.
It's not lost on me that there was the background noise that on the night that Barack Obama and his beautiful family stood in the park and the images, oh my God, if anything ever moves your heart, the images of seeing people from all different backgrounds, ages, hues, just that level of diversity and the hope that was in the air. But that there was a room in Washington, D.C., in which Mitch McConnell and Jim Boehner, and even our very own Wisconsinite Paul Ryan were meeting to say that we're going to do everything we can do to make this guy a one-term president and to make him unsuccessful. And so there had been this steady, quiet drumbeat of what do we do to roll back some of these advancements. The thing that it reminds me of being a history major is the period of Reconstruction. Mm-hmm. Immediately after slavery ended in 1865, there was a brief period for about 12 years in which African American men, let me be clear, were making their way into political and legislative offices. They were getting elected to state houses and to the federal level. We saw senators, we saw all kinds of movement. And then just like that, with the flip of a switch, some folks who had been watching it, who weren't that keen on it, they said, yeah, that's enough of that. Nah. And in some cases, physically, literally drove elected Black officials out of state capitals. It's enough of that. We've had two powerful women run for the highest office in the land. There are other countries that have already done this, have already said, of course she'd be a great leader. Yes, we're going to support her. But some believe that possibly sexism has prevented, not about necessarily your politics, but your sex has decided that, not quite ready for a woman to lead. Even women, there are some women who I don't know if I feel safe with a woman leader, given all the war and angst and problems in the world. And so, no, I'm just not going to be able to do that. To the point of we have to understand our own stuff. I call it baggage. That's not a new term. And I always used to say in my diversity, because I do diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. In fact, I was in the midst of a DEI training for all state employees in the Capitol when it was shut down because there had been federal initiatives done under the first Trump administration to get rid of DEI in federal contracting, federal employment, and the states began to quickly follow suit. But I would always say to people that baggage is both good and bad. Because baggage is literally everything that we are. So me being Southern, that's baggage. You know, me being uh, of a certain educational attainment, that's baggage. Good baggage, bad baggage. But I bring it with me no matter what. And the example that I give, all of us are getting to that point, or may have already, seen that point, where we're taking care of our children. We have an elderly parent. We have someone that we are responsible for, our husband, our spouse, our partner, and they're sick. They're having surgery today. They're in a nursing home. They're not eating, whatever's going on. You come to work, but on each break, you pick up your phone and you call and check on them. The child that stays home from sick today, you call and check on them. People that are of a certain age, when we would come to the workplace, we would hear, whatever you have, leave it at the door. Leave it at the door. Marriage in trouble, leave it at the door. Kid, even the good stuff, kid graduating, we're having our first grandbaby, leave it at the door. Nobody wants to hear it, leave it at the door. The reality is we know that that's not true. So what I had to figure out is how to manage everything I bring with me into the workplace so that it does not impact the way I work. Yesterday, as a part of inaugural comments, there was a moment when President Trump said he wishes to be colorblind. Well, there's a good chuckle. I appreciate it, because hopefully that means you know exactly where I'm going. Anyone that says, I want to be colorblind, please let's educate them that means that you have a deficiency. We're not supposed to be colorblind. Medically, we're not supposed to be colorblind. The overwhelming majority of us are not literally colorblind. And if you were, it'd be a concern. Most often, what people mean when they say, I want to be colorblind, is that I will make decisions based on merit, character, performance that are unbiased, that are fair, as best as I can. That's all it means. That's all it means. So, one takeaway, we don't use the word colorblind. Shouldn't use the word colorblind. Say what you mean and mean what you say. I'm going to treat people fairly. I'm going to treat people decently. They will be judged on all the same criteria. End of story. Now, real quick, I know that there are folks that will say, well, then, Michelle, then we should be getting rid of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. Because you're saying, say what you say and mean what you say. I'm going to treat people fairly based on the same set of criteria. But because we have not adequately dealt with certain historical systemic issues, it's hard to say that today in 2025, we all start from the same playing field. We are still at a point in our country when we are seeing women still be the first woman CEO, the first woman police chief, the first female fill in the blank. We're still saying that about Black people, about people of other races and ethnicities, about LGBTQ people. We're still doing it. And the reason why we're able to talk about the first is because we know that systems have been designed to keep other folks out. The house that I am sitting in right now, I'm over near 107th and Calumet. When you look at the deed for this house, there is a covenant that talks about the fact that this house and the land that is on could not be sold to Black people. The language is literally still on the documents for this home. Now, everybody was like, yeah, it's a different time. You're going to just ignore that and go ahead and sell the house. But the language is still in the original paperwork for the land that this house was built on. And we have racial covenants all over the city of Milwaukee, all over the state, all over the country. That's that piece about we're not all starting from the same point. There is a great film called The Story We Tell, and it talks about how military veterans would come back, Black veterans, World War II, World War One, want to use the GI Bill to buy a loan, to buy a home, and they were redlined or pushed into other neighborhoods. Somebody said Washington Heights, exactly. They were pushed into other communities, and white homeowners. There's this one part in the video that I never thought about until I saw this white gentleman say it. He said, "I'm not racist. I don't have a problem with who lives next door to me. But when the federal government comes in and tells you the value of your house is going to drop significantly if these Black people move in," and the white gentleman looked dead in the camera and he said, "This is all I have. This is all I have to leave my family. All my wealth is tied up into this. I don't want to move, but white flight is going to have to happen because it's all I got." Never hearing that, never understanding that perspective of it. The fact that at the end of the day, we all trying to do the same things, which is to protect our family, to protect, the little that we have, to grow what we have. It becomes challenging. So as we talk about DEI, as we talk about, I don't care which administration it is, I don't care what facet of life. When you hear companies like Walmart say, "We're scrapping this," Target, "We're scrapping this," and there was somebody else that just did this the other day. It's a little bit gut wrenching because it feels like that there had been at least an acknowledgement that we haven't always played fair in this country, that college admissions were stifled, that people were denied, opportunities for employment, that there were applications. I always talk about the example of the one of Miller Brewing Company, in which they used to, come in and, "Hey, I'd like to apply for a job with Miller," and the receptionist would be so nice. "It's so wonderful. Well, here's the application, and thank you so much," or just dropping off your resume. And as it was handed off to the manager, people who worked inside Miller have shared with me that there would be some little connotation somewhere on the paper, a B if you were Black, to let the hiring person know the race of the individual. And what I was also told is that far too often, that little B on that application would result in that application being tossed in the trash. We got to figure it out. We got to figure it out because so many groups stand to be impacted if we try to say that the playing field is level and from this moment forward, we will only look at this criteria. One of the examples that I'd like to give, if I could, as I begin to wind my comments down and we can open, hopefully, discussion or conversation. Um, when I went to go take the LSAT to go to law school, I worked, I told you I worked in social services. And the guys at the end of the shift, they would play dominoes. Everything was done. It was quiet. We worked second shift, so it was late at night. And the guys would play dominoes. And I'm not a domino player. And I'm watching and I'm listening to them play dominoes. And I heard a guy say, "Take it to the grave. Take it to the graveyard. Get these bones. Do this." And I'm like, "What?" terminology is this. I go to take the LSAT, which is the exam to get into law school, the very next day. The very next day after I watched them play dominoes. I don't know if any of you have ever taken a law school exam, but they wheel this crate in with the test with an armed police officer, gun on side, the whole 9 yards. This is so serious. And then they crack the crate in front of everybody, and you're like, whoa. I mean, like, if you talk about intimidation, this just came in under armed guard. Crack the crate open, they get the exams out, we get the exams. The third question on my law school exam: if you are engaged in a game of bones, what are you doing? Had I not watched those guys play dominoes the night before, asked some questions about what it is that they were doing, for sure that question was going to be answered incorrectly. One other example. Table is to saucer as cup is to what? What do you think? Table is to saucer as cup is to what? I see folks thinking about it. Any guesses?
I don't remember. I've heard it before.
Chair. A table and a chair go together. A cup and a saucer go together.
Table and a chair go together. Cup and a saucer go together. Okay. Anybody else? Different guess? Agree with Barbara? The other Barbara, I'm looking at your face. It is so funny. So I will tell you, it depends on your household. In some households, Barbara Toll said, cup is to saucer as, what'd you say, Barbara? Table is to chair?
Yes.
Because they go together.
Yes.
Some people
in my household.
Okay. Some people, when they answer, they say cup is to saucer as table is to floor, because the cup sits on the saucer, table sits on the floor. There were other answers. The writer of those questions were writing those questions based on their experiences. But if I grew up in a house in which the saucer was actually used for toast, the two didn't go together at all. The cup was over here for drinking, and the saucer held our toast. My grandfather would let the coffee overflow into the saucer and sip the coffee from the saucer. I'm like, really, really?
Yep.
Granddad, really? So, and if you were in some houses, there was no saucer at all. We can't afford a saucer. It's all we could do to have cups. I've never seen this saucer that you speak of. What is this? So I could answer this question wrong based on my exposure. I'm not less than. I'm not any, less smart, any less capable, competent, but my exposure is different. What did I say? We have to understand, when we come into a job, an environment, a situation, we bring baggage, we bring bias, we bring ethnocentrism. My view that the way I do things is the right way. One of my faves. Is there a correct way to fold a towel? I see smiles. I see smiles. I don't know if you'll admit it, but I will say, yes, there's a correct way to fold a towel. It's the way my mother taught me how to fold a towel. And my husband at the time would be like, are you kidding me right now? Are you kidding?
Wrong way. Yes.
The towel was in the closet. I helped you out with laundry, Michelle, and I'm looking in the closet going, oh my God. And I'm like biting my nails because I'm like, you folded these all wrong. All wrong. And this guy, my poor husband, was sitting there just like, You wanted me to help with laundry. I helped. And now you're criticizing my towel folding.
Mhm.
That was when I
Mhm.
was younger. I'm divorced now. I would love help with towels today. And however you fold them, put them in there. We're good to go. We grow when we learn. We understand what it is we bring with us into a room. And the only thing that I'm worried about is that there will be folks that will view these issues. I remember in the state capitol, this is where February will be Black History Month.
Mhm.
Lena Taylor and I started Black History Month observations and celebrations in the state capitol. They eventually grew into Black Advocacy Day, and amazing opportunities for people to learn and grow about the process. But one of the things that also happened, Black History Week, which was started by Carter G. Woodson, an African American who wanted to highlight the accomplishments, contributions of Black people because they were frequently intentionally overlooked or slighted. Um, we would find people to honor. It's traditional in the Capitol. We do resolutions for everything. We honor the UW football team for a great season. We honor construction workers. We honor everybody. And so for Black History Month, Black legislators put together a list of people that they wanted to honor. Um, and we actually had a white legislator who looked
Mhm.
at the list and said, I disagree with this list. And he came back and he did his own list. Now, I think we had done maybe 12 people, 13 people. So he decided to do a similar number. When the white legislators' resolution was done to honor people in the month of February, I'm sorry, to honor Black people, and the month of February was done, if memory serves me correctly, he was honoring 5 white people. He was honoring 4 Native Americans, no, 4 Hispanic people, 3 Native Americans, and I think it was 3 or 2 Black people with a Black History Month resolution. We were honoring fewer Black people than we were every other race. And this, if I could just say it, is our month. We created it. But ultimately, we couldn't even control it. And the thing I'll just say, just as a side note, probably inappropriate, but I'm going to say it anyway. This white legislator was married to a Black woman.
Oh no.
I was
Poor,
going to have you bring that up.
poor woman.
Yeah, dad to two, or at least at that time, 2 beautiful children. And I just thought, like, so you don't see the problem with this? You don't see why this is so offensive? And there will be people that will look and think, I'm doing this in your best interest. Um, I think we should include everyone. And to try to remind that legislator, this very week was created because everyone was not included. So this is Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter.
Mhm.
So I'm going to stop there because of time. But this is work that we all have to understand. Every single person is impacted by efforts to be inclusive, to be equitable, to be fair. And these are not the fights of just one group or another. And these are not things that won't inadvertently show up at our own doorsteps. There are going to be women who all of a sudden find themselves being shut out of positions.
Oh yeah.
Because when we say, hey, you got a fire department with no female leadership, and you got folks saying, well, JD Vance said, I don't even believe that, women should have some of these jobs. We got people saying, I don't believe that women should be in combat in terms of the military. There will be women who didn't understand how they were going to be impacted by DEI. And it's going to run. There will be folks economically who won't understand it. There will be folks racially, obviously, who won't understand it. I will end here. Two things. One, I was looking at an interview a couple of weeks ago. Well, no, probably more than about 2 months ago now. And it was a Hispanic family that Mexican family that had come through the country illegally. And they had gone on to become successful. They were business owners, they were thriving, and they were creating the American dream for them and their families. They were being asked about immigration policy. And with the straightest face, they looked dead in the camera and they said, those people are criminals.
Mm.
They should have used the process the right way. And even the interviewer, this incredulous look on their face, like, but you just told us that you came through the exact same way. But they no longer saw themselves that way. They had assimilated, they were Americans, and these other people who wanted nothing else but a shot at a decent life, they were criminals. That's one. This is an everyday fight. It's an everyday fight. If we are not careful, if we are complacent, if we are not strategic and deliberate, many of the gains that we have fought to secure will erode in front of our very faces. Mm-hmm. And women will wonder why pay, why opportunity, why access. When folks have said that our daughters will have less rights than we did, that applies across the board. So I'll end there. But hopefully these are conversations that people will take back with them to their respective organizations and groups and say, what are we doing? How are we helping? How do we continue to highlight this? And I'm going to be quite frank in terms of some of these organizations and companies, because, I'll say this real quick. I just had a conversation with some folks from the NAACP, because with the push to get rid of DEI, anything that now has in its name a racial connection, a gender connection, in some cases a faith or religious connection, companies that have traditionally been sponsors, donors, supporters may begin to pull back, because I don't want my bottom line impacted because somebody comes through and looks at my annual report and says, oh, you support the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People? Yeah, no more Freedom Fund dinner tickets for you. No more philanthropic donations for you. So organizations that depend heavily on contributions. Now, some people, they're ideological sponsors and donors. Others, we're just a service agency or organization. But I'm telling people, you need to start paying attention to how you do business, what your organization is about, where your funding streams and sources come from. And I'm saying that to faith organizations, to anybody that will listen. The attack on DEI is going to show up in ways we don't even see coming in. Yep. And those are my comments. And thank you so much for having me.